With the regular session wrapped up, this is a good time to recap what's transpired over the last 4 months. And there's certainly a lot to talk about, including new abortion laws that garnered the attention of the entire country. This week, moderator Susan Godot gathers a panel of journalists who cover the Capitol on a regular basis to get their take in this in-depth conversation.
Thank you, Rich. There is much to dive into, so we're going to get to it. I'd like to introduce you to our panel of guests. First, we have Sean Ashley, who is the publisher of Quorum Call. We have Trevor Brown, who is a reporter with Oklahoma Watch, and we have Caleb Branch, who is a reporter for The Frontier. Thank you all for being with us.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. All right, Sean, I've put you in my upper right-hand quadrant, so I'm going to start with you. The primaries are next month. There's a major election coming up in November, in case you have not heard. In what ways, if any, do you think the fact that this is an election year impacted how things worked at the state capitol?
Well, I think every legislative session, politics play a role in what's going on because many lawmakers are simply looking to the next election. And we've certainly seen hot button issues such as abortion play a big role in this legislative session, as well as some other social and cultural issues. What has been surprising, however, is that tax cuts have not played the same role that we've seen in previous years. So maybe the public is moving on from those, or at least politicians seem to think so.
Kayla, do you think these kind of hot button topics, as Sean mentioned, there's just so much going on right now in 2022, isn't there? I mean, we don't even know where to direct our gaze, right?
There's definitely a lot going on. And, if you're ever up at the Capitol during the legislative session, you'll see a lot of different groups from, nursing groups to LGBTQ advocates, to just people there for cultural days, trying to share and really get in front of lawmakers to try to talk about, their specific issues that they'd like lawmakers to take a deeper look at, or even change, some of the wording in bills that may be legislating on those issues that those groups represent.
So Trevor, I want to come to you. One of the big topics that garnered national attention for Oklahoma, giant topic, is the topic of abortion, not only here in the state, but nationally with Roe v. Wade. I'd like for you to talk about the impact that the Oklahoma state legislature's push on the abortions issue has had here in Oklahoma. And what impact, if any, do you think Roe versus Wade, if that is overturned, that could cause some to change their stance on what they've done so far here in Oklahoma?
Yeah, so pretty much every year abortion bills come up. I've been here for 6 years. There's been multiple abortion years every single time. There's a heated debate every single time. The difference this year is that with the leak of the Roe versus Wade decision, this is a lot more real. It's a lot less hypothetical, a lot less, maybe the courts are going to stop it. Maybe this is going to happen. It seems like things are really moving to a head now. And I think as we saw during the session, lawmakers were very much aware of that. They're aware of, the ramifications of the Supreme Court's decision, and they're preparing that. And Oklahoma is going to be among the most restrictive states when it comes to abortion laws, and it's going to take effect almost right away. So it's definitely going to play out, in a long, big context of things going forward, how this, affects companies coming here, how this affects, lawmakers' re-election efforts. It's definitely something that's going to be a fallout for many years to come.
Well, Sean, those might be two different things, a re-election efforts by our legislators versus companies deciding whether or not they want to locate in Oklahoma as they look not only at abortion, but the transgender participation in sports issues. What all is in that basket?
Oh, it's so hard to say, but what we've seen this year are a number of those bills, like you mentioned. Senate Bill 2, for example, which the governor signed, which limits the participation of students in sports based on their biological sex. The governor also has a bill which would require students to use the bathroom associated with their biological sex. And as both Trevor and Kayla have mentioned, a number of abortion bills have gone through the legislature and been signed by the governor. And then we have the possibility, when the Roe decision is made, that lawmakers may look at coming back to the Capitol to address that issue further based on what's actually in the decision.
All right, Kayla, I want to come to you, and I am going to switch gears now. I want to talk budget. You know, the governor, did he get what he wanted from lawmakers this year, or was he kind of angling behind the scenes, as it were, to get what he wanted on that budget?
Right. So lawmakers approved a $9.8 billion state budget, and they sent it off to the governor's office. But the governor's office has been pretty quiet on their thoughts on the state budget. And it seems like some of the talk behind the scenes is that the governor's staff wasn't as involved early on in budget negotiations as they have been in the past, and that there might have been, a little bit of tension there. At the beginning of session during the State of the State speech, Stitt had really talked about tax cuts, and he talked about school choice, school vouchers. He talked about increasing pay for law enforcement, and a lot of those things, they did happen. There was an increased pay for state troopers. And there were not, as Sean said, as many tax cuts as people expected to see. But, recently Stitt did ask lawmakers to create a new tax incentive program for an unnamed company to potentially come to Oklahoma and create, a lot of jobs. And lawmakers followed through with that. They appropriated nearly $700 million in a new a tax incentive program. And that was a collaboration between lawmakers and Stitt. So I think there were definitely, it was a balancing act, and there were compromises there.
Okay, so we talk about a tax incentive program. Everyone was really excited about the grocery tax, eliminating the tax on groceries. Trevor, what kind of got in the way of that? Why did that fall by the wayside?
It's an interesting kind of how it played out. This was one of the few issues where Republicans and Democrats, saw eye to eye on. This is actually something that Democrats have been pushing for years. And, when it comes to tax cuts, Republicans are usually all, open ears for that type of thing. It got down to how much tax cuts should go to income tax cuts, how much should be corporation, tax cuts. And of course, they finalize on, try to help with some of the inflation help by sending all Oklahomans a $75 check that'll be coming later in this year. But, I'm sure this will be another issue where they'll be looking at it in future years, but it's definitely a miss for, the people that were calling for this.
Sean, it's maddening. I know you've been covering the year. You're just such an expert in the legislature. It's maddening. You start with these hopes and the ideals, and a few months later, it's basically wah. So for us lay people who don't go and cover the Capitol like you three do when it's in session, honestly, what happens? How do things get bogged down in the weeds like this?
It varies issue to issue. House Appropriations and Budget Chair Kevin Wallace pointed to the Senate as being the roadblock in the discussion of the grocery tax, for example. And we saw that earlier in the session when they amended a bill that would eliminate it to imposing a 2-year moratorium. But Trevor's right about the reasoning for that. They were concerned about the impact on state revenues as part of the larger budget picture. But when you look at some of these other issues, it varies. Sometimes it may be a group that's going to be negatively affected, as Kayla was talking about earlier, and they bring that to lawmakers' attention. Or lawmakers discover that what they're planning to do won't accomplish the goal that they're aiming to accomplish. We had a great example of that a year ago when a bill was recalled from the governor's desk because it lacked a word, not. What that bill would have done would be to allow the hacking of computer systems. It would have made it legal.
Wow.
Because they inadvertently left out the word not. So it can be a variety of issues, from fiscal issues to the impact of legislation to simple grammatical mistakes.
All right, we're switching. I always switch gears when I come to Kayla. There's just something about her. The bipartisan House committee is investigating the now terminated state contract with Swadley's. When do you expect to see a report from them on their findings? And do you think it'll come out before the election?
I think now that session is, winding down, it's in its final days, lawmakers will likely start to ramp up more attention on the Swat Lease investigation. But, I know they're calling in a lot of folks to testify. They're asking for a lot of documentation. It'll likely take a few months at least before they are able to go through all of that and create a comprehensive report. So I wouldn't imagine to see anything, before later this summer.
All right, Sean, I'm sorry, Trevor, another big issue is the federal aid dollars. What was there a lot of wrangling on how to use that in the legislature this year? And how is that supposed to be used in Oklahoma?
Yeah, so this kind of goes to this overarching debate of, who has power in Oklahoma? Is it the legislature? Is it the governor? Is it both? There's been some concerns the way this money, it's almost $2 billion. Legislature could give recommendations, the governor would decide. Obviously, a lot of lawmakers wanted to have more control, more say, and especially in light of some of these controversies that Kayla just mentioned. And, they want to have, a voice, not only a voice, but an actionable voice. So what we're seeing with this special session, which will be played out over the next several months, is that they're going to treat all these appropriations for this federal money as bills. So they're going to run them, need to approve the House, the Senate, and then goes to the governor. So there's kind of these some checks and balances that maybe weren't there before.
So Sean, can you see how that might be maddening for Ralph and Mary sitting at home somewhere in Oklahoma, and they say, well, we can't get our grocery tax, but they got all this money in federal aid. How does that help me?
It is really interesting because budget writers have been proud to say on the House and Senate floor that they didn't spend all the money that they had available in this year's general revenue fund in the $9.8 billion budget that Kayla mentioned earlier. They're leaving about $500 million on the table. And that's been a constant for the last several years. In fact, going into this budget season, they had more than $1 billion in cash available, some of which they're appropriating for one-time uses, some which will go into savings. I think your question hits on a bigger issue that the legislature is soon going to have to deal with. And that's that appropriate balance between revenue, expenditures, and the couple sitting at the table. How are they going to benefit, particularly when revenues do better than expected, as they are this fiscal year? As Trevor mentioned, individuals will be getting a $75 check, married couples $150, but at current prices, that's only a few tanks of gas and really doesn't compare to the revenue growth that they saw.
So I think people see those big numbers, but then in their real life are seeing not a lot of change. They're saying, I'm still struggling. And I think, one great example of that was Oklahoma got millions of dollars for eviction relief and, housing rent support. And across the state, there were long wait lists of people who were, they had signed up to get that money, filled out all the paperwork, they're trying, not their best not to get evicted. And it's been 6 months and they haven't gotten any of that money. And now they're facing eviction and it was a real struggle. And so I think that people have been really frustrated with what they might see as, just the gears are turning too slowly. There's a lack of immediate action when immediate action is what we need when we're dealing with the pandemic and job losses and everything else.
Trevor, is there a disconnect?
Yeah, we were talking, hearing from people that were upset about the abortion laws and stuff like that. They were asking, they're passing all these laws to ban abortions, but what are they doing to prepare for this new kind of way of life? Are they putting more money into the foster care system? Are they putting more money into, crisis counseling? We're not really seeing that directly. And that's something that, voters are not happy about. But, when it comes to election, sometimes is abortion good or bad is the issue that trumps some of these more nuanced issues.
Yeah, that is the national litmus test, I think, for everything. Sean, I'm going to give you the last word as it's almost done. So was this like every other legislative session or does it stand out?
I think it stands out for the rapidity which they moved at times, passing some of these very controversial measures. I think the number of controversial measures probably outdistanced some previous legislatures. I mean, they had 4 very large abortion bills that they passed this year. The bathroom bill, the bills concerning sports, and a variety of other issues like that. So this one was unique.
All right, Sean Ashley, Quorum Call, Trevor Brown, Oklahoma Watch, and Kayla Branch, The Frontier. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very welcome.